God, I love Christmas. Out of all the thoughts swirling around in Andy's mind, that one was front and center. The house before him was perfect. A 2-story European style with tall windows outlined with sparkling Christmas lights, a wraparound porch with 2 antique rocking chairs, and a curving driveway with a gleaming blue Lamborghini, and a brand new GMC Savannah parked at the end. In the backyard, he could see a swing set with 3 swings and 3 miniature electric play cars. 2 bright pink, and 1 dark blue. Such opulence in of itself was enough to fan the flames of greed within him. But the kicker was that the place was secluded, the only house at the end of a long offshoot of a smaller road, which ran through a small town that was a full 2.5 miles away. The Rocheforts, the family in question, had all left, going out on the town as they did every Thursday night, perhaps this time to celebrate Christmas Eve in style. Well, these asshats are just begging to get robbed, he thought, his frozen lips curling into a wicked smile. It had taken 3 weeks of near constant observation for him to memorize their daily and nightly patterns. Though if he were being honest with himself, he could have done it within the 1 week. The Rocheforts were a very punctual family with set routines that they rarely ever broke. But he had to be more thorough than usual. You see, he had far more to lose this time around. He had been caught twice already. Smaller felonies both times, but he knew realistically that he wasn't the type that could survive well in prison. Plus, he had done some research on the Rocheforts, and had found that the father and mother were both heads of their respective companies, both of which, by his math, brought in a little more than $2 billion a year. Which meant that if the robbery ahead of him was a success, he could live out the rest of his days without ever needing to resort to crime again. He could get away from his hellhole of a house with its clinging sour odor, stained ceilings and groaning pipes. He wouldn't need to listen to the mice moving about behind the thin walls. Wouldn't need to awaken to the tickle of insect legs on his bare skin. He could run from the crumbling neighborhood that he had holed up in with its leering gang members and filthy vagrants. He wouldn't need to watch his back every time that he left his house. No more ignoring the taunts of Crips and Bloods and bold addicts. No more stepping around puddles of vomit. No more living in fear of getting skewered by a stray needle at the dingy local Goodwill. He'd be free. Andy smiled brightly as he envisioned himself speeding along a sunny, warm stretch of highway in a car that cost 20 times more than what his job as a grocery clerk paid. He saw himself amidst a tangled, breathing knot of lithe, naked women, all beautiful and all hungry for him. He saw himself sleeping on a bed the size of a car in a penthouse where there were no mice or stains or weird smells. His reverie was cut short by a sudden blast of snow-strewn wind that almost made him gasp. Shaking himself free of those happy might-bees, Andy stood up from behind the snowbank that he had been using as cover and took in the area. Behind him was a sprawling field. Before him was the road and the house. To his right, the road ended in a small cul-de-sac, and to the left, the road led out to a larger sibling. High above him was a full moon hung low in a starless sky, and cast the snow-covered grounds in a ghostly light. All was silent, save for the whistle of the wind through the trees which bordered the area, and Andy's own breathing. "All right," he thought, his breaths turning to vapor on his lips. "Time to go." Andy hopped over the snowbank and moved across the street and up the driveway, a large bag clutched in his gloved hands, managing to keep his eyes off the shiny, sleek metal of either one of the cars, which was quite the feat for him. The security systems on the door which led into the garage were easy to unlock. The thumbprint scanner, which safeguarded the door inside of the garage, the one which led to the house, was a bit trickier, taking a good 20 minutes to bypass, but he got the job done. Upon entering what he supposed was the mudroom, Andy nearly retched at the sudden tidal wave of odor that crashed into him. God, reeks like St. Nick's ship party, he thought, wrinkling his nose. The stink of artificial vanilla mixed with the burning spice stench of gingerbread-scented candles and pine-scented cleaning fluid hung in the air like an invisible fog. A miasma of the most Christmassy smells possible. Once he was able to get over the initial nausea at the all-encompassing stink, Andy moved into the foyer and looked the place over. The foyer was large and spotless, its hardwood floors glowing in the dim light of a dozen candles. To his left was the media room. A Christmas tree weighed down by so many ornaments that only a few green patches of pine were visible stood next to a media center with a 50-inch plasma screen TV and more game consoles than he thought existed. To his right was the kitchen, done up in stainless steel and sleek chrome. Beyond that, there was a window that looked into the backyard. And in front of him was the staircase which led to the second floor. Andy glanced between the three ways and quickly decided upon the second floor, where the family members' rooms would be, and, reason stood, their more valuable trinkets, too. As he ascended the stairs, a family picture caught his eyes. He had only observed the Rochefort's activities from a distance, only seeing them as vague, far-off figures milling about their daily activities like ants in an ant farm. So Andy stopped and stared. The picture showed all four family members crowded together, a mother and father standing between two little girls, all of them smiling widely, showing off their blindingly white, perfectly capped teeth. Andy grimaced. Everything about their appearance, from their perfect hair and teeth, to their obviously expensive clothing and the stunningly unsubtle makeup which plastered their gaunt, aristocratic features, all screamed that these were the kind of people who had no care or consideration for anyone but themselves. And Andy hated those types of people. The soccer moms, the royalty of the PTA meetings, the ones who looked down on people who hadn't been able to afford college, the modern-day aristocrats. The thief raised his fist and brought it down on the picture, grinning as the shattered glass cut the picture behind it up, ruining those perfect faces. He continued on his way, his steps muffled by shag carpeting. When he reached the top, he found that the hallway which curved to his left was dark as night. Briefly, he considered finding a light switch, but he didn't want to chance someone coming by and thinking that something was up. So he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight instead. The flashlight's blue beam cut through the darkness and allowed him to see the 5 rooms ahead of him, 2 on each side and 1 at the end. That one was, he guessed, the master bedroom. Save the best for last, he thought, turning to enter the first room. The room belonged to one of the girls. It was spacious enough to have a tiny bathroom that had nothing of interest within. The main room was filled with high-end toys and painted a red-pink color that awakened discomfort in him. The paint, mixed with the lack of light, made him think of the inside of a mouth. With an extra burst of speed that he told himself wasn't due to unease, he cleaned out what he thought would fetch the best price on one of the deep web black market sites and then moved on to the next room. This one was much the same as the other room, but the bathroom in this one was larger, and a quick search of the cabinets revealed several bottles of Prozac, Ritalin, Thorazine, and a tiny tin of small black pills which he couldn't identify, but looked worth taking anyway. He was about to leave when his eye landed on 2 objects on the sink. 2 small plastic jars filled to the halfway point with blue liquid. Are those denture containers? Andy moved closer and looked at the rest of the area surrounding the sink. He saw several high-end toothbrushes, several stacked rows of dental floss, and a tube of bubblegum toothpaste. Maybe the kids have braces or mouth guards? Maybe the silver spoons on their mouths fucked up their teeth. Andy snorted and backed off, shaking his head in annoyance. Maybe I should take some of that Ritalin, get my head in the game, he said tersely, turning away and walking out of the room. The 2 rooms opposite him were locked, but the door to the master bedroom was wide open. Inside was a massive wardrobe which sat next to another bathroom, a bookshelf filled with books on physics and New Age spiritualism, a mirrored dresser, and a massive canopy bed with silk sheets, above which sat a large painting. Andy took note of the painting as he cleaned out the room, taking gleaming jewelry from an ornate box on the dresser and several higher-end pills from the bathroom, which he saw had 2 more little plastic jars. Once he was satisfied with his work, he turned and jumped onto the bed, wincing at the muffled shriek of the springs. The painting was large and set in a gold frame. If he was being honest with himself, Andy had to admit that he had seen the gold frame and remembered the old spy movie trope of the safe behind the painting. He had barely glanced at the painting, and now that he had, he was a bit disturbed. It was a pretty simplistic painting, all things considered. Just a dreary-looking field of brown flowers underneath a swollen gray sky with the shadow of a farmhouse in the distance. But there was just something about it. Something about the limited color palette, the way that the grass was caught in mid-sway, and that faint, decrepit building in the background, all framed by an ominous, sunless sky. Andy couldn't help but marvel at how utterly out of place it was. A stain amidst all the glamorous, shiny wealth. Still, he had to see if there was anything behind it. His bag had grown heavy, so he set it down beside the bed and gently pulled the painting off its hook. There was no safe behind it, no high-tech vault door with chrome keys and complex dials or fingerprint scanners. But there was something. 2 small gold keys pressed into the plaster of the wall. These must be the keys to those 2 doors, he thought. Hell of a place to put them. Sparing a quick backwards glance, Andy took the keys, hopped off the bed, and went out into the hall. The first key he tried opened the second door. A second after, the darkness inside poured out like water from a burst dam. He turned his flashlight on. The click of the pressed button sounded like a gunshot to him. Had the house always been this silent? He wondered briefly as he shone the light into the room. The beam illuminated a vertical stripe of wood-paneled floor and the edge of something that he couldn't fully see. Grumbling in annoyance, Andy fumbled around until his hand landed on the light switch. He flicked it on, and the room was bathed by the harsh white light of a fluorescent bulb. Andy had expected a spare bedroom or maybe some kind of high-end kinky sex dungeon. But instead he found himself looking into a plain, unpainted, windowless room which was filled with display cases and shelves, and cardboard boxes stacked in neat pillars. A storage room? Andy moved into the room and went to the shelves nearest him. They were dusted and well-maintained, but simply made, and filled with an assortment of seemingly random things. A rubber ducky, a Walkman, an old bust of some philosopher, a Swiss Army knife with all of its attachments extended, an orange peeler, and a worn elf doll with its bendy legs dangling off the lip of the shelf. Andy felt the tiny hairs on his arms stand up, though it wasn't the cold that was doing it. He turned and took in the rest of the room. Almost every shelf was filled with the same sort of random knickknacks with the exception of one. That shelf held rows of books, each without titles on their spines, each one old and disintegrating. And in the center of the opposite wall was a large, dark purple flag with what looked like small hieroglyphics sewn into the edges. At the center, dyed in blue, was a serpent eating its own tail, surrounded by 8 green stars. What the hell are these people into? He thought, moving towards the flag to get a better look. As he did, his foot caught a box and he stumbled, putting his hands out to protect himself from the collision, slamming into the wall with a grunt. He pushed himself upright and then stood still, listening for any sounds out of long-cultivated instinct. But there was nothing. The house was silent. Letting out a relieved sigh, Andy turned his attention to the box, which had tipped over, spilling its contents on the floor. Andy's eyes went to them. He bent down and picked up one of the objects. A wallet? Andy opened it up. Inside was a picture of a young woman with black hair and freckles. Her license identified her as Alice Whitmore, age 23. And then Andy looked at the date. 1987. A sliver of ice speared his heart. The thief grabbed the box and opened it, sending dozens of wallets of every type, from glossy leather to cheap bacon print, tumbling to the floor. Andy took several and read the names and dates on them. A young black man named Howard Morris, whose license had expired in 1980. A shy-looking woman with an upturned nose, Angelica Pritchard, 1977. A thuggish bald man whose face was adorned with many piercings, Andrew Bennett, 1976. As Andy read each of them, the coldness in his chest grew and tentacled outwards, making his fingers shake and fumble, sucking the moisture from his mouth, and muting the sounds around him so that all he could hear were his own rapidly degenerating breaths. The last wallet in his hands was cracked and worn. A smiling man with a strong jaw and happy eyes staring out from a black and white photo that was yellowed with age. Warren Meeks, 1923. Below him, a muffled sound echoed up through the floor. A door opening. Andy, his heart already racing, gasped and dropped the wallet. Oh God! They're home! He turned and left the room as quietly as his trembling body would allow, returning to the master bedroom to get his bag before exiting via the window. But Andy stopped when he entered the room. I left my bag next to the bed, right? He thought, feeling the first clammy beads of cold sweat start to form on his brow. He bent and quickly checked under the bed, hoping that he had accidentally kicked it underneath and not noticed. But he could see nothing but dust bunnies. What the hell happened to my bag? He thought frantically. From downstairs, several voices began to converse, their low tones creeping up on him from the stairway. Soon, he knew he'd hear their footsteps. They'd no doubt want to come up to get ready for bed. There was no time. Thinking on his feet, Andy grabbed the keys and went to the first door, the one that he hadn't opened. He unlocked it and slipped in, pressing his ear to the door in time to hear the sounds of the family's conversations grow louder as they ascended the stairs. The conversation died down when they reached the top. A door opened. Then another. He could hear them whispering to each other. They knew something was wrong. Andy's stomach clenched. A sudden shout, high and shrill and very angry, tore through the silence. It was followed by the sound of running feet and low curses. He could hear the low feminine voice of the mother barking orders at the father, who only grunted in response. Andy backed away, a fearful whine building in his throat. He had never in all his life been so frightened as he was now. A memory came to him. A memory of him playing hide-and-seek with his father out in the woods at dusk. His dad had been a complicated man, an early-age traumatic head injury having burdened him with episodes of forgetfulness. That day, as the sun had started to go down, he had had one of those episodes. He had left his little Andy all alone in the cold woods, waiting for his father to find him as the sun sank beneath the horizon and darkness fell. Andy shivered and turned away from the door. He wasn't too high up. If he could get to a window, he could escape. Could run from the house, and the Rocheforts could be... Andy stopped in his tracks. There was a window, and the ghostly light of the moon shone through the panes to reveal another bedroom. It didn't look like a spare bedroom, no. This room smelled of stale sweat and old food. The large bed in the corner was unmade, and its sheets were stained. An IV stand stood guard at the foot of the bed, gleaming silver in the moonlight. With the exception of the bed, the only other furniture in the room was a small desk with a TV on it. What the hell? I thought the Rocheforts were a family of 4. A light clicked on in his periphery. He turned, feeling the terror rise in his gorge like vomit. The light of the bathroom, which he hadn't noticed in his unease, was on. A tall, bulky figure stood in the doorway, the light behind it obscuring its face. Andy tried to speak, tried to will his hands into fists, tried to force his body to move, but he couldn't. The tension in his body made his muscles feel like cement. Tiny beads of moisture welled up in his eyes. And the figure spoke, its voice deep and slightly garbled.
Howdy, friendo.
Andy's bladder released as the figure charged at him. A massive shadowed fist rose and fell, and the world went black. Andy awoke to the feeling of a cold finger pressing into his side. He jerked upright, or tried to. His sudden movement was arrested by a painful tightness in his throat, wrists and ankles. Tied up? Tied up? Oh God, I'm tied up! He took stock of himself. He was naked. The binds around his wrists and ankles chafed at his skin, and the one around his throat gagged him if he moved his head even the slightest inch. Whimpers forced themselves from his clenched teeth as tears leaked from his eyes.
"He's awake, da,"
roared a voice next to him. The suddenness drawing forth a frightened scream from Andy. A door opened and several sets of feet entered the room. A quartet of shadows clustered around him, the overhead light blotting out their bodies. Silence fell. He could feel the Rochefort's eyes on him, scanning every inch of him. Andy whimpered again and wished that he could curl into a ball or use his hands to cover his genitals. The feeling of vulnerability, the sheer humiliation of being examined in such a way, felt wrong beyond words. A hand grabbed his thigh and squeezed painfully, eliciting a shriek. The family laughed. "This one's got some fat on him," said the mother. "Yeah, but not as much as some of the others. Why can't we find a fat man? The city's got lots of them," whined one of the daughters.
"The last one we had was that skinny brat from the homeless shelter, so stop being so damn picky,"
growled the man who had called for his father. The one whose room Andy had intruded upon. "Yeah, Lori, plus the city's a few hours away and it's too big. We probably wouldn't even find anyone before the sun rose, and I doubt that the car would hold him even if we did." This voice belonged to the other daughter. "Natalie's right, hon. I think he'll do just fine," said the father. "Now let's lift him up so he can see us. I want him to know just how badly he's fucked up tonight."
He found the wallet, Star,"
said the son.
"I think he knows already."
The father shushed him. "Shh, hush now. What we're doing is tradition, and you know what your mother and I say about tradition, don't you?" "That it's important to keep some things constant," said Natalie and the son at the same time. "Very good, kids." Andy could hear the smile in the man's voice. Then, with a loud ratcheting of gears, the table that Andy was strapped to lifted up until the faces of the Rocheforts came into view. At first glance, the faces of the four in the photo were exactly the same, with their high and hollow cheekbones, their aquiline noses, and their perfect hair. But then they smiled at him, and their teeth weren't the straight white teeth that he had seen in the pictures. Instead, he saw rows of triangular yellowed fangs set in swollen liver-colored gums. Shark's teeth. "Get over here, kiddo," said the mother jovially. "Show the man your chompers." The sun came into the light, and Andy wailed like a puppy with a broken leg. The other members of the family at least looked normal if they kept their mouths closed and their lips pursed. The sun, however... The sun was something that couldn't be called human in any light. A swollen, hairless head with almond-shaped eyes set in sunken sockets sat far apart from a crooked nose that overhung a maw, a red gash in the doughy white flesh that was bristling with blackened, sharp teeth.
"Nice to meet ya,"
said the son, his mouth curling into a distorted facsimile of a smile. Andy felt the horror of everything roar through his body. It burned past the muscles and viscera, burrowed through the veins and arteries with lamprey teeth, and plucked at the nerves like guitar strings. His body went limp. His tongue felt thick and dry and foreign in his mouth. He had been rendered mute. The mother checked her watch and gasped, revealing a second set of glistening fangs behind the front ones. "Well, goodness gracious me, look at the time. It's 1 on the dot." The faces of the son and both of the daughters broke into wide, excited grins. Their teeth shone like yellow Christmas lights against their pale skin. "Does this mean we get to open our presents now?" asked Natalie. The mother nodded, smiling. "Of course you can, dear." "Do you want to open the biggest one first?" "Yes, yes!" chorused the children. The mother turned to the father, whose predatory gaze was locked onto his captive, and asked, "You know where the knives are, right, sweetie?" "Yep." The father's smile widened, and he clapped his hands. "Okay, kids, I'm gonna go upstairs, and when I come back, we can start with the unwrapping." He turned and left, whistling a holly jolly Christmas through his teeth. The song sounded high and keening and sibilant when filtered through fangs. Andy whimpered and prayed with all his being for the nightmare to just end. But it didn't. Merry Christmas.